Hey folks, I'm going to give you a little treat today. I'm going to take you behind the scenes and talk about how I make my aircraft reviews from start to finish. So when it's time to do an aircraft review, the very first thing I have to decide is exactly what vehicle I want to cover. Generally, this will be an aircraft from the early jet era onwards, but I do occasionally throw in prop stuff and helicopters just to keep things interesting and provide some variety, since I know a fair number of you watch my reviews just out of general interest and not because you're necessarily specifically interested in tips on that individual plane. For purposes of this video, I'm just going to say plane, even though sometimes I do helicopters. Now, the very first factor in picking something is the question, do I actually have it? I don't have every aircraft in the game unlocked. I'm close, I've got most of them, but not everything. Especially not like some of the event vehicles that I missed over the years. And that's especially true since the snail sometimes likes to go back and add things into like ranks 4 and 5 and whatnot. And I'm glad they do that. It's just that I haven't gone back to research all that stuff sometimes, since I've been focused on the higher tier planes, which take longer to unlock. Additionally, if it's a plane that I already have, I may have already flown it a bit, and I might know what to expect out of it, which can make some of the later parts of the review process quite a bit easier and faster, so if I'm crunched for time, I might pick something that I've already got a good feel for. If it's something I don't have, sometimes I'll go grind for it, but a lot of the time I'll submit a request to Gaijin to give me a test drive. One of the perks from being in their content creator program that I get is that I can occasionally get a temporary test drive of a vehicle I don't have, specifically for the purpose of making content with it. For example, when a new patch comes out, obviously I don't have all the new top rank jets unlocked in like an hour. They give me a temporary test drive for them. Another part of it is that if it's a plane that I want to get some close air support footage for, I need to check if I've got an appropriate ground vehicle at or around its BR that I can pair it with. My ground trees aren't anywhere near as fleshed out as my air trees, and there are a lot of gaps. So sometimes I have to go ask Gaijin for a test drive of a tank to use with the plane, even if I already have the plane, so that I can fly it out as close air support, but more on that later. Now, after I've picked a vehicle, usually I have to pay to upgrade my crew to expert if it's something I haven't used much before. For the higher tier stuff, that gets really expensive on my Silver Lions, especially if it's a rental plane that I don't even own yet. So I'm making an initial upfront investment of anywhere between like 50 to 75,000 Silver Lions to expert some of the lower tier stuff, up to over 1,000,000 Silver Lions for a top tier jet to get an expert crew at the beginning of 2023. I get a small monthly stipend of free Silver Lions from the snail to offset this a bit, but not completely. And making these vids is still pretty expensive on my Silver Lions, so I usually have to do quite a bit of grinding to refill between videos. Not saying that's bad, I'm not complaining, not looking for some pity party or anything. I'm just going through the process one step at a time. Once I've got a plane picked out, paired with a ground vehicle, crewed and otherwise ready to go, I take it out for a couple of test flights to evaluate some basic information, like how fast can it fly with the flaps down? Is it possible to wing rip it in a dive? What the climb rate looks like? How it lands? Some of the basic flight characteristics like that. I take notes, and I usually keep a little post-it note on the bottom of my monitor with some of the more important numbers, like, you know, the combat flap speed and things like that, when I'm taking one of the new vehicles I'm doing out into an actual mission. Really, it's just so that I don't forget, since I'm getting old and I do a lot of these videos and I just can't possibly have all of the important speeds for everything all memorized at the same time. Now, the very first thing I do after I'm, prepared like that is I take the plane out into a dozen or so matches where I'm not even really bothering with combat. I'm literally just checking out the flight performance in real conditions. If it's a bomber, I'll time how long it takes to get into bombing position if I dive in towards a target, versus flying level, versus climbing. For fighters and attackers, I'll spend a good amount of time trying to get into dogfights, but not actually really taking any shots. Just trying to get on somebody's 6, one-on-one, and see how the plane does at staying in position and, offensive and defensive maneuvering. So think about it. If I get a lucky jump on someone when I'm first trying the plane out and I shoot them down really quick, that might make for some good footage, right? But that's more a matter of, my positioning tactics, and it doesn't tell me anything about how the plane is going to work in a prolonged fight. So I try to get into a bunch of different combat situations and just see how long I can last and try out different tactics. For example, trying to see how the plane does in vertical maneuvers. I'll get into a bunch of fights and do some vertical scissors and loop engagements and stuff, compared to horizontal maneuvers and pure rate turn fights and that sort of a thing. I don't generally record any of this, but for this video I saved some footage, and that's why I'm not taking any shots in the segment that you're watching right now. Generally speaking, though, I haven't recorded any actual footage for the review by this point in the process, and I'm literally just goofing around learning the plane. Once I have a feel for how I think the plane is going to work, I go out into missions and start grinding the upgrades in earnest and try to get footage that I think will, demonstrate the different aspects of the vehicle. For example, if a plane has a really underpowered engine, I'll go try and get into some situations that set myself up to get energy trapped so that I can demonstrate that in some footage. If it's got great BVR stuff, I'll try to capture some footage of good BVR missile kills out at crazy long range. If it's generally a good dogfighter but has crappy rudder control, I'll try to show some situations where the rudder lag made me miss gunshots and stuff. If the plane is a ground pounder or can at least take some bombs, I'll try to get some footage of dropping its most efficient bomb load on a strategic base just to show how much damage it does. If the plane has new or unique features, I'll try to demonstrate that too. For example, in my recent review of the Kurnas 2000, I included a short clip of a gun kill where I was able to use the combat gun sight with the radar lock for the automatic lead indication. That's a new feature, and I wanted to show it at least once, even though it's a short clip. Plus, I'm going to try to get at least a few segments showing a good match where I was able to use the plane's strengths and get some solid kills. Or, if it's a bomber, show off some good footage of well-executed bombing runs, that sort of a thing. It depends on the plane and its role. It's also worth mentioning that if something comes up in a match that's really unusual or uncommon, or just flat-out hilarious, like some 5-way mid-air collision or something, I'll try to squeeze that footage in just for entertainment value. The main point I'm trying to emphasize here is that the footage I pick to save and include in the videos is usually picked to demonstrate specific situations or techniques, rather than just to show off some time I had a good match. It also means that sometimes I have to sort through hours and hours of recorded footage to pick about 10 minutes worth of stuff that I want to use. And those segments have to fit well together. Sometimes I get a lot of really great footage that shows what I want, but the matches went too long, or they were all too short, or whatever. So I have to mix and match a bit to fit my time format, and that can be a chore. Now, the process of capturing footage gets drawn out quite a bit if I need to get close air support done, especially for top-tier jets. I consider myself a generally average player overall, ground and air. I don't claim to be some hotshot S-tier god or whatever, so if I need to get footage of some jet using some super high-end loadout of guided anti-tank missiles and stuff in close air support, it means that I might need to go out and get 4 or 5 kills in my first vehicle in order to build up some spawn points, in terms of a ground battle. And that isn't something I can do every match. So even then, that has to happen. I have to get a really good kill count right off the start in a match where one side or the other isn't steamrolling, so that I actually have enough time to fly out and get some footage before the match ends. Considering how powerful top-tier SPAA is these days, This phase of the review process is usually the longest at anything above like BR 9.3 or so, especially since if I'm driving like a rental tank or something that I'm not really familiar with. The silver lining is I get to have a lot of fun doing the cast portion, because I really do enjoy tank battles. It's just that it usually takes a lot of clock time for me to get the footage to use. Now, after I get to this point, and generally feel like I've gotten comfortable with the plane, I fly it out, maybe 4 or 5 times in VR. With the VR headset, I use a first generation Oculus Rift, nothing special. And so when I comment on the plane's cockpit, that's where I'm drawing that opinion from. I fly in RB, and yes, I know that using the headset in RB puts you at a huge disadvantage, but it's still fun and exciting, so I include my thoughts about the cockpit anyway. The last bits of footage I usually record are things like the little intro segment, the front angle profile clip I use during my final verdict, some cockpit B-roll. Sometimes if the plane has unique features, like VTOL stuff or whatever, I'll usually record that sort of thing last. After I have all of the footage recorded, that's when the real work begins. The first thing I do is research a little bit about the aircraft, or at least refresh my memory if it's a plane I'm already familiar with. For the historical info I present in my reviews, I try my best to only use primary sources, and the vast majority of places I get my info from are books and encyclopedias out of my personal library. And yes, what you're looking at right now, Victor Belenko absolutely autographed the MiG-25 entry in one of my books for me back in 1999, and you'll hear all about that cool story if we ever get the Foxbat in the game and I get a chance to review it. He's a fun guy. Anyway, this has the added benefit of giving me some fun reading material so that I'm not just staring at screens all day, go out and touch the grass, that sort of a thing. I usually only resort to online articles if it's something that I just can't find any information about anywhere else. For example, the Soviet BI rocket fighter. I couldn't find even a passing reference to that thing in anything out of my library, so I had to go digging online. Now, this does occasionally mean that some technical errors will crop up, since books and encyclopedias aren't always 100%. Sometimes information is out of date, that sort of thing. But just know that I do at least make some effort at giving as accurate of an overview, historically speaking, as I can, without going on for 20 minutes about it. I also try not to be too biased or nationalistic in what I present. And if I find fundamentally conflicting sources of information, I'll usually try to just mention that the sources disagree, or give the best estimate I can by comparing what different places are saying. For example, the kill ratios of different aircraft, like in conflicts around the world during the Cold War, are very often very different depending on who you ask. So I do my best to be as fair as possible with that stuff. After I've prepared the history, it's time to finish the script and record the voiceover. Now, I've had some serious dental work done over the years, which affects my pronunciation sometimes, and I've occasionally had to re-record things, but generally speaking, this doesn't take too long. I use an externally boosted condenser mic over a 3-pin XLR connection. One thing I always have trouble with, though, are audio levels, as how a recording sounds when it's fresh, compared to when it's in an editor, compared to how it sounds on YouTube, can often sound really different. And I've had to re-render a video more than once a couple of times in order to get better audio levels. If the volume and balance on some of my stuff ever seems weird or inconsistent, my apologies for that. Just know that it's always given me trouble. The last step before I get into any video editing is preparing any on-screen overlays that I need. For example, in my current format, when I'm discussing a plane's radar or its weapon loadouts, its missiles and stuff, I try to show a cropped up overlay showing the tooltip stats from inside the game as an on-screen reference. That usually doesn't take too long, but it's still worth mentioning that I prepare all of those graphics by hand using a combination of Paint.net and Pixel Edit as my graphics software stack. For actually capturing my gameplay footage, regardless of what game it is, anything on my channel, not just War Thunder, I use a combination of OBS and debut video capture, depending on what game I'm recording, if I need live audio, and a few other minor details. For the video editing, I use a combination of Adobe Premiere and Adobe Premiere Rush, the regular version of Premiere and Premiere Rush. There are some things I can do with Rush that take 5 seconds, but would take me like 3 or 4 minutes to set up in Premiere. And similarly, there are a lot of things that Premiere does that Rush doesn't. So I end up using them both for different things. Speaking of which, I actually use Adobe Rush to generate the thumbnails for most of my videos, as it lets me throw an overlay up and find like an individual video frame just by scrolling through, rather than like jumping back and forth between screenshots and stuff. I used to use Paint.net and GIMP for thumbnails, but I switched over to making them in Rush sometime in the middle of like mid to late 2021, I think, and they're much quicker for me to set up now. With the actual video files themselves, I render everything at 4K 60 FPS at a reasonably high bitrate. I used to put my files through Handbrake to get the size down, but after a lot of consideration, I stopped doing that. After some of the tests I did with like some private videos I uploaded to YouTube, and compared the quality myself between one and the other after YouTube did all of its internal conversion processing, I wasn't really happy with the results, so now I just upload my raw 4K 60 FPS renders. For my War Thunder videos, that only takes a couple of hours to upload, but like my hour-long Skyrim videos, those can upload overnight. The reason I mention this is that if you watch some of my older stuff and it looks like it's at a lower bitrate and has crappy video quality, that's why. I used to upload at 1080p 30, now I upload at 4K 60. After the video is uploaded, I watch through it once from start to finish, usually the next day, to make sure there weren't any problems or major editing mistakes, but sometimes little typos or something still find their way in. Sorry. I still do this as a hobby, and sometimes little slips of the tongue or transition errors or something end up in the vid. And if it's something really minor, like a screwed up frame crop or just 1 or 2 mispronounced foreign words or something, it's probably not worth the time to re-record and re-render the whole thing and upload it all over again. But sometimes big problems do turn up, and, every once in a while YouTube's internal video processing has caused weird visual rendering errors on the final product, so every now and then I have to upload something twice. Not too often, though. My normal schedule, as of making this video, is to put out my War Thunder vehicle reviews on Wednesdays. Normally, I have at least 3 to 6 pre-produced and uploaded, but not yet published. My goal is to maintain my release tempo of 1 video per week, even if I get bogged down with stuff at my day job. If, like, my computer at home were to shit the bed unexpectedly, or some other big thing comes up that prevents me from producing vids for a couple of weeks. Sometimes the snail unknowingly forces my hand, and that kind of forces me to put out a video ahead of schedule. For example, as soon as the Yak 141 was teased in one of those dev trailers like a month and a half ago, I went and published my Yak 38 review like immediately a couple of weeks early. It was entirely a coincidence that I had been working on it around the same time, but I knew as soon as the 141 came out that interest in the 38 would drop off significantly for a while. So I wanted to publish while it was still hot, so to speak. Now, once a video is live, I try to keep on top of the comments for about the first 100 or so. Anything that's even vaguely positive, I'll give a thumbs up and a heart stamp, and I'll try to reply to as many as I can that have like direct questions or some useful tidbits that I might have missed in the review and that sort of a thing. But after something gets into like 3 digits worth of comments, it's really hard to keep up, especially if I've put out another video since then. So if you left some really great note on a vid that I didn't see, sorry. Again, I do it as a hobby. Anyway, that's about all for now. I hoped you enjoyed this look at what my process is like for producing the War Thunder vehicle reviews. As always, thanks for watching.